Hi there. So in this video, we are going to talk about loading in SvelteKit, and I feel like this is probably the chunkiest part of SvelteKit that you need to learn and sort of understand because the routing and the endpoints are a bit more straightforward, but this is a bit trickier to understand at first. So what is the loading function? It is a function that runs before the component is created. So it runs on the server and on the client. And that for me was sort of the hardest part to kind of understand, and I'm still sort of trying to grok that. But basically, it is kind of like the controller in an MVC framework. So if you've used Flask before, for example, you'll have these routes, and it's similar to Express. When they hit the route, then it returns something. So basically, you've got two different types of routes. You've got one that returns just data, and that's kind of your endpoints in your, well, I don't have any, but that would be like your index.js, those types of things, your endpoints. And then you've got these that return a template, which is kind of like these, your pages. One big difference between the load function and something like Flask or Ruby on Rails controller functions is that you cannot put any secrets or any passwords in your load function. You also can't really do anything about cores. So if you need to do some cores thing, it needs to be put in an endpoint. So any password secrets, or if you need to get around cores, then you need to put your fetch call into one of your endpoints and then call your endpoint from the load function. Okay, and it can go and fetch data in these routes and then like pass data into the template. And then you do like your if and else, kind of like Django and Flask, probably Ruby on Rails too. So for example, here in our load function, we put it in script context equals module, and then you're going to export async function load just like this. And then notably what you need to do is return at least an empty object, or it's going to give you an error. So for example, here it's not really doing anything, so I just return empty object. But it can have different things. You can see all these. We're just going to look at props mostly here, maybe max age. But so you can send props down, and that will populate this right here. Okay, and again, similar to something like Flask, where you pass in data to the template, and then you can use that data to do if-elses and whatever. Okay, so that's the load function. Now let's get to the part where it runs on the client and the server. That's kind of the tricky part. And I'm still not 100% sure on this, but I think I've sort of figured out how this works. Okay, so basically, the default behavior is I come to a page, and it runs here on this client, so home load function, so it's just console.logging home load function, and on the server. But after I have already got to the website, the client-side router takes over. So now I can click these things, and it'll run here in the client, but it's not going to run on the server anymore. Okay, so I click this, it loads again. Okay, so basically the client-side router has taken over. And if we look at the source, this is the part I don't quite get. But you'll see here it's saving all the data that I've called in my fetch. Here in Pokemon, all this data that I've called with fetch. So basically I get a list of Pokemon, and then for each Pokemon I get their data. And it saves all that here in Svelte data. So it's a bit weird. I assume it's doing something caching, or basically when it runs on the client, it doesn't have to re-fetch the data, is my impression, is what that's doing. But yeah, it saves it all here. But it also server-side renders it here like that. Okay, so this is the argument for something like SvelteKit versus Ruby on Rails. Well, one of the arguments is that it has a client-side router, and it's a bit more snappy like this. Boop, boop. So random is going to take a while no matter what, because it's like fetching random Pokemon. But here in network, you can see when I go here, it goes and fetches them but it's from disk, so it's quick. So it's basically cached in the browser. Yeah, so the other part here is if I refresh this, you'll notice it's not going and getting that from the network because it's already done it on the server side. Okay, and that's basically what this is for. So it doesn't have to refetch the data. But now if I leave and I come back, it does use it because the client-side router has taken over, and it's going to run this function again. Okay, so I hope that sort of makes sense for what it's doing there with like it runs on client and server. So let's look at some other behavior though. So for example, I could turn off the router, and basically this is turning off the client-side router and then restart. And so it's going to have more of a classic router, something like Django would have. So basically each time I go, it goes to the server, And now you can see every time I go to a different one, it's going to say Pokemon load function because it's hitting the server again. And here there's no fetching because it's doing it all on the server. And it's a bit clunkier, you see, right? Because it's got to go to the server and refetch the data, and you can see it loading up there. But to make this a little better so that we do have sort of a snappier experience, you can put in a max age for each page. So say just cache this page for 30 seconds, for example. So now refresh, I got to go to them first, so it takes a bit longer, but the second time I go to them, now they're cached like that. So that's how you can sort of use the server side router, but keep it sort of snappy. And you'll see here, so before, with the client side router, I click on this and it's going to print Pokemon load function again. But it's refreshing the page every time I go to a different one. So it's still running on both server and client. But yeah, notably it's running on server every time because I turned off the router. And I assume, yeah, it's using this stuff here. Yeah, I guess the point of this is so that it doesn't have to refetch the data on the client. And it can just fetch the data on the server. Yep. Okay, so that is almost everything for this load function. Let me just show you... Actually, no, I'll wait for a different video. Okay, that's all for this video, and let me know if you have any questions. I'll try to make some more videos on the other aspects of the load function, but that is it for now.